You know, many times people ask, can you use neurolanguage coaching for beginners? And my answer is yes, absolutely. However, there is a caveat. There must be a language in common that you can communicate in. Whether it's the native language that you also speak with your learner, or whether it's a common language that you can communicate in. I have actually helped a German client to learn Spanish from English, and also a Turkish client learn Spanish from English. So those were the common languages that we used. English was the vehicle, but they had different native languages. And we're going to look at it from different perspectives. I'm going to bring in some different neuroscience. I'm going to bring in some different aspects. So let me just get the PowerPoint up in the background. And if you can, everybody, continue to just let us know where you are connecting from. It's always beautiful to see people from the world together here. So, one of our major objectives, and I think all of the neurolanguage coaches who are here with me tonight will agree that we want to bring the joy back to learning. And I do think that this is the objective of all educators worldwide. How can we bring the joy back? And my favorite sequence of words is from Boyatzis and McKee, that joyful discovery, playful creation to powerful, flowing performance. And, you know, if we put that into brain terms, joyful discovery is the curiosity, playful creation then is the ownership of the learner autonomy, and then the flowing performance is the flow state, alpha brainwaves. And that's what we're looking for. So just a quickie to introduce neurolanguage coaching, and we will be touching a little bit more on this a little bit later. We are bringing together professional coaching, neuroscience, neuropsychology, and all of us come from the teaching background, all of us. So we embrace the teaching to bring everything into this concept to then deliver in a different way the transmission of knowledge that we carry. And if we separate out, on the left you have what we are bringing in from the coaching side. We're bringing in professional coach training, ICF accreditation, so we follow the structure, the guidelines, the ethics of the ICF, the International Coach Federation in the US. And we introduce coaching conversations throughout the process, whether it's around metacognition, whether it's around emotional triggers, how the brain learns, whether it's about improving cognitive skills. We are constantly using that coaching conversation. We're integrating the coaching competences. The ICF have 8 competences that we integrate into our process. We take the structure from coaching, goals, actions, motivation, commitment, and we bring in the spirit of coaching, the soundboard, the person accompanying the learner, the accountability partner. And from the neuroscience, we are bringing in the principles of neuroscience, which we are integrating into the process. We are speaking about how the brain learns, functions, reacts with the learner, about metacognition, how to bring in the awareness. Everything starts with awareness. How the brain reacts, how the brain learns, and adapting it to everybody because we're all different. And bringing in the emotional intelligence and the neuropsychology. So we can very much, as I said, bring in the awareness as a start point for neuroplasticity, you know, talking about the brain, talking about the learning processes. This is going to be key in everything that we do. And wanting to get our learners into the flow state. By the way, for those of you who don't know, there is research from the positive psychology arena that demonstrates that children in Montessori settings actually achieve more flow state than kiddies in normal schools. And we know that alpha brainwaves are, if you like, the perfect learning state. And that's what we're looking to get even from our beginners. So I'm going to take it into different perspectives, because it really is this question of, okay, well, how can we fast track beginners? And I know that many of these principles are out there as generic principles. Along the way, as I'm going into each of these, I'm going to be explaining how, from a neurolanguage coaching perspective, we are implementing them. So I have identified various ways that we can turbo boost our beginner. And if we get time later, by the way, I will try to do a demo with somebody in the audience with maybe some Spanish or some Italian, or we will see. Let's see later if we get the time. These for me are the key points for the turbo boost. Motivation, chunking, learner autonomy and ownership, psychological safety, how the brain likes to learn, conscious and subconscious input, and how can we trick the brain? Now, you could say these are for all different levels, but actually for beginners, I would say these are essential, absolutely essential. Now, let's be honest about motivation. Let's really be honest about motivation. Those of you who have done the course with me, you know that we are coming into that space of honesty. But the problem is that we have to separate out the different meanings that each and every one of us may give to motivation. Now, I was doing a little bit of research, and it's quite interesting that we could think about wanting or liking something. And I think motivation is how much do you want it, as opposed to how much do you like it. And maybe, by the way, if we've got both want and like, wow, maybe then we've got a bit of a more bingo in place. So interestingly, this particular research is looking at the areas of the brain when we are in that wanting space. And very much we can see that we have the dopamine effect. Whereas if we go into liking, the chemistry is different. So wanting and liking actually stimulates different chemistry in the brain, either the dopamine or the opioid. Now, who's to say that if we have both, we might be having a bit of a brain chemistry cocktail there of both opioids and dopamine? Quite interesting. And also interesting that, you know, liking is more about pleasure, etc. Whereas wanting is not so much about that. It's more about wanting for rewards and generating that dopamine effect, positivity. And, you know, there is so much research on intrinsic, extrinsic, which is best, and so much research that actually proves that intrinsic is the better motivating factor for all of us. And then actually to maximize intrinsic motivators, this research demonstrates that we need to have the skills and the support to be able to get that lasting challenge, healthy behavior, creativity, and accountability. So maybe motivation isn't so simple as we think. Now, what is motivation? Definitely, this is where, as educators, we have to move away from, I motivate my learner, because that really is not true. We can entertain them, we can amuse them, we can make them laugh, we can make them have a good time, but we cannot change their intrinsic motivation. So it's about us moving away from this. We don't motivate the learners. We can give them interesting activities, etc., but that's not touching upon the motivation. Now, the second problem is, I think we have a linguistic confusion with the word motivation. You know, in many of our languages, motivation connects to motive, which makes it feel like it's the reason. So are we taking the word motivation as the reason for learning? And if we are, then we're not really getting the energy and the spark that we want. What we need is to take motivation into the realms of vision, passion, and the motor for learning. Now, some of you know that my motor for learning Spanish was, in fact, I fell in love. And I think that's one of the major motivators worldwide for people to learn a language. And it's a brilliant way to learn a language. Obviously, we can't get our learners to go and fall in love, and then that's their major motor for the learning process. But what we can do is have very, very on the point coaching conversations to push our learner to vision. What is the vision behind this learning process? Because if it's only about being able to speak at work and being able to conduct a business meeting, you're probably not going to get the commitment that you're looking for as a coach. So what could get them excited? What's going to get them going? You know, we have a beautiful expression in English, which is, what's going to rock their boat with this language learning? What are they going to be able to do with it ultimately? Can you push them into that vision? You know, if they want to learn Spanish, is it because they want to go to Machu Picchu and they can see themselves on that mountain? Or do they want to go, I don't know, to a flamenco class in the south of Spain and be able to learn flamenco from the originals? If you find the vision, you're going to find the commitment. When I fell in love, I was 15 years old. Probably puppy love, but actually I did get married to him in the end. Honestly, at that age, I should have been doing my school exams. I wasn't. I was writing love letters, translating Spanish, learning Spanish every single day. Nobody made me, nobody forced me. I got the books out. I was translating love letter to love letter, writing, looking, learning. Nobody was forcing me. Nobody was making me. It was me doing it. And that's why I say, if you find that hidden motivation, if you find that passion, vision, drive, motor, they will do things by themselves. You won't even need to say anything to them. They're going to sit and do it. They've connected with the vision. Now, if you know the vision, you can keep coming back to it. Come on, I can see you on Machu Picchu now. I can see you sending me a message from there. Come on, I can see you in Sevilla in the Feria de Abril, dancing flamenco with the Spanish flamenco dancers. And you are going to keep reminding them. Now that is coming in from the sports coaching. The sports coach knows exactly what motivates and drives that coachee to win the cup, win the race, be the best. And that sports coach is constantly driving, come on, you're going to win the cup, come on, you're going to do it. That's the coaching coming out in the learning process. But you have to find the vision first. So with a beginner, this is absolutely key. It's a crucial step to get your beginner from 0 to I want to do that. And I see myself doing it. And you'll find that if you have that, you're going to get them into turbo just with that vision. By the way, just want to add neuroimagery. It's only just come to my brain, by the way, so forgive me that I don't have the research links here. As some of you know, I had a little bit of an accident with my leg at the beginning of September. And I broke my fibula. And interestingly, I connected him with a neuroscientist here in Tarragona, and he reminded me of neuroimagery, visualizing. And now in a lot of rehabilitation, they're seeing when people see themselves walking, they see themselves doing things, they have a faster recovery. So who's to say that we couldn't apply this imagery, this visualization of somebody speaking the language? Who's to say that we couldn't bring this to our learners and say, see yourself doing it every night before you go to bed, before you go to sleep? See yourself in Spain speaking to the Spanish. The power of the brain cannot be underestimated, ever. By the way, everybody, after 8 weeks, I'm walking. Yes. We will see if I can be dancing next month. Now, next principle. Bite-sized chunks. Break it down, break it down, break it down. By the way, this is a little bit the mantra of neurolanguage coaches, I think worldwide. Break it down, chunk it down. I've even had somebody write chuck it down. Actually, chuck it down has a totally different connotation and meaning. In England, it means that it's pouring with rain, if you don't know. So I think it was a misprint when I saw it. Now, bite-sized chunks, you know, one of the problems that our brain has is that if the brain is overwhelmed, we go into panic, all of us. If you've got a problem, normally your brain goes, ah, because your brain thinks, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this? How many of us at university, when we started university and we thought, oh my God, I've got 3 years. How am I going to do this? I've got 5 years. So the brain goes into panic. The one thing that will calm the brain down is break it down, break it down, keep breaking it down. And the more that you can break it down, the more you're going to be able to assimilate that information. Now, interestingly, when I did a little bit of research on this, it was actually introduced in 1956. George Miller, in his book, The Magical Number 7, plus or minus 2, some limits on our capacity for processing information. 1956, everybody. This was even before we had the brain scans and the MRI scans and everything else. And actually, in his book, he really talks about breaking long strings of information into little chunks, into units. And apparently, chunking enhances working memory. And it's most effective when we get the chunks between 5 and 9. So average is 7. Now, I always say in neurolanguage coaching, we actually are looking to set chunked down goals. Now, this is very, very important. When we go into a goal setting, we are funneling as much as you can. Because the more you funnel, the calmer your learner gets. But the other point is, the more specific, the more measurable. And then we come into SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and with a time period. So everything that we do when we go into a goal setting, we are getting our coachee to break it down. So it's not acceptable anymore to have a learner, and especially a beginner, I want to be able to speak. Fantastic, but what does that mean? How can we classify that, even quantify that as a goal? And there we have to take them on that journey, and we have to break down into mechanical goals, which are grammar, structure, pronunciation, and mastery goals, which are functional language goals. So we're actually breaking down from 2 aspects of language. Beginners don't have any idea normally about language learning unless you've got somebody who has learned a language. So we have to be able to take them through that goal setting process very, very clearly and precisely and get them in with the right questions. And normally we always say we're going to be looking for 2 mechanical, 2 mastery goals. So actually we chunk it down a little bit more than Mr. Miller suggests. And we work on those goals for a short period of time, and then we do goal review, and then the learner sets the next goals, and then they set the next goals, and then they set the next goals. And the idea is that we are block building the language up. And for a beginner, that is going to help them to keep calm. Your beginner is coming in with, I want to learn English, I want to learn Spanish, and panic. How am I going to do it? Oh my God, there's so much to learn. And we are going to help them by calming them down and saying, we're going to do it step by step. We're going to get the foundations in place first, then you're going to build it up. And it's going to be like building blocks. And we're going to keep adding to the blocks, adding to the block, adding to the block, and you're going to be connecting, associating, and developing that language through a step-by-step, constant, consistent build-up. That is going to bring certainty, and I'm going to say it's also going to bring psychological safety, and we're coming into that in a minute. Firstly, we're going to have a look at learner autonomy. Now, everything that we do in neurolanguage coaching is about, can I use the word devolution? It's a little bit like giving back the power to the people. That's what we're doing. We're moving away from us as the central point, and we're really moving to give our learner the space and the voice to be able to steer their own process. Just checking in with some of you. I know some of you know this from the course. Can you remember who said, I like to learn, but I hate to be taught? It's a famous phrase. Anybody remember who said it? Yes, Virginia. Absolutely, it was Churchill. Churchill really said, I love to learn, but I don't like to be taught. And may I suggest that none of us do? All of us wish that we had been born knowing everything. Children hate to be taught. Teenagers absolutely detest being taught. And adults, if we're seriously honest, sometimes we don't like to be in the seat of the learner. So by giving autonomy to our learners and by giving them that sort of power to say, look, this is your process, this is you owning this, it totally changes that dynamic of feeling like we're being taught. Doesn't feel like that anymore. Feels like we're in an interaction and we're involved in a process which is helping us accumulate information. That's how we want our learners to feel. Some years ago, one of the Danish neurolanguage coaches contacted me, and she said she had some beautiful feedback from one of her clients. He is an executive in his 50s, and she is doing the neurolanguage process with him. And apparently he said to her, you always ask me what I want and how I want it. And in all my learning years, which is like 45 years of my life, I had never, ever, ever been asked before. And I love it. That's what he said to her. He absolutely loved being asked. And I think if you ask some of the clients of neurolanguage coaches, they will all agree. You're going to get some clients that are shocked. Some clients are not used to it. You're going to get some clients that are really surprised. But this is about them taking the ownership. Now, we help our learners to really create their learner roadmap, but they are the ones setting the goals. They are the ones setting the activities of how they want to do it. If we are the ones telling them what to do and they don't like it and they go into a negative brain state, they're not going to learn. We're going to be helping them to learn how they learn, because everybody is unique. Every brain is unique. Everybody potentially learns in a different way. Who am I to tell you how you learn? I don't know. And if you don't know, how about we go on a voyage of discovery and we find out? And maybe we could try different activities and you give me feedback every time. Does it work? How does it feel? Is it effective? Shall we test it? And we go on the journey that you are self-discovering what works for you. Permission questions. We're moving away from being directive. May I ask you, how about? What do you think if? And I seriously would say to your learners, I'm always going to be asking you permission questions. And this is probably going to be unusual for you because in a teaching process, normally you're just told what to do. So may I share with you, the reason I'm asking you is twofold. Firstly, when I ask permission, it's going to keep your brain calm, so you won't feel like you're constantly getting a barrage of directives. And secondly, it's because I'm opening the door for your autonomy. And you can always tell me no. Now, some of you have actually helped me with some language learning over the last couple of years, and I'm starting again with somebody to help me a little bit with another language learning process. And I've already warned that coach that I will, when she asks me permission, if I want to say no, I'm going to say no. And I think, you know, it's really about your learners saying no. And maybe you say, how about we do this again? And the learner says, well, actually, Rachel, could we move on? I've had enough of this. My brain's kind of like really stuck with this now. Could we come back to it next week? Fine, no problem. That's okay. So all the time we're gauging their, if you like, their happiness, their brain state. And by constantly asking permission, it's allowing them to decide even more. And this beautiful quote from Doyle, I think it's my mantra: the one who does the work is in fact the one who does the learning. So we have to stop doing it for them. We have to get them doing it much, much more. And that doing it means they take ownership. The ownership creates and generates the connections, and that generates the long-term memories as well. And we sit and co-create with them. We don't give them materials anymore. We sit and co-create materials with them, or they create materials. And we also have the research from Sheldon and Kessler that demonstrates that when students autonomously self-regulate, they get more goal achievement and well-being outcomes. By the way, there's some recent research from 2021 demonstrating that goal setting actually was leading to well-being. It's connected. And in this particular research, they're recommending that educational institutions worldwide should do goal settings with their learners. Yes, coaching process for student well-being. So let's come back to this question of psychological safety. I was with one of the groups yesterday, one of the professional neurolanguage coaching training groups, and we were talking a little bit about this psychological safety. You know, we do explain fight or flight to learners, because a lot of our learners, and especially beginners, obviously they're going to be clamming up. You've got embarrassment, you've got nerves, you've got feelings, oh my God, I feel I can't learn this, negative beliefs, you've got all sorts of things going on. So just explaining how the brain reacts, functions, how we go into that survival mode is key. Even if you've got kiddies, if you've got teenagers, if you've got adults, explaining it in their simple terms if it's kiddies, more complex terms if it's adults, but adapting the explanation to each and every one of them. Now, in very, very simple terms, language learning, language, let's say, production fluency is a front to back process and a back to front process. When we learn, or whatever we are doing, we're working in working memory, and slowly, slowly it's going to short term, into long term. Language fluency is in the cerebellum. So language fluency comes from the back of the brain. Now, to have that beautiful, fluid, I'm going to say fluency, when you're speaking a language, the brain needs to be fully functional, calm, no emotional triggers. Because we need that sort of, all the parts of the brain are coming into play. You know, we've got Broca, Wernicke, right hemisphere, effective communication, language fluency, and all of the brain is playing with that language. Now, as soon as there is an emotional trigger, I always have this imagination that the emotional midbrain puts up the gate. And as soon as the gate comes up, front to back can't function. And that's where you've got the block. And I was explaining to my group yesterday that, you know, even being absolutely fluent, you could even say bilingual in Spanish, if I get into a situation where I feel compromised or nervous or something, I notice that my language capacity diminishes. And it's quite interesting to self-observe when that's happening, because it's kind of like, oh, wow, this is it. I'm having an emotional blockage in the middle of the brain. And you really can observe it in yourself. Now, sharing this with learners is key, and especially with beginners. And sharing with them that, this may happen to you many, many times along the way of language learning. Even when you get to being fluent like me, it's going to happen to you still. And, we do have all of the research, and mostly relating to math anxiety. Virginia, I'm smiling. Yes, it does happen to native language too as well. Absolutely. If you get into a situation where you're feeling nervous or whatever, it can even happen to our native production of language. Yes, thank you for that. So a lot of the research on psychological safety is relating to mathematics. I think sometimes language is even worse for some people. And math anxiety back in 2002 was already demonstrating that it diminishes working memory capacity, diminishes attention, and diminishes prefrontal cortex functions. Absolutely, because we've gone into survival mode. So the survival brain is driving, the prefrontal cortex is totally offline. And right from the beginning, with beginners, we should be trying to coach around emotional triggers if they're arising. And even maybe exploring a little bit, how are you feeling about language learning? What is going to make you feel safe? Those key questions from the beginning. What is going to make you feel safe in this learning process? Just to make all of you smile, I did actually find some research on Dutch courage. Dutch courage is the expression where, after consuming alcohol, people speak better language. Language speaking becomes better. And actually it's proven in the research. So yes, it's quite interesting that, and again, what happens with alcohol consumption is that it actually relaxes, and the emotional brain is going then into that relax. And so then you have this sort of, the brain is going wild with its own sort of journeys there. Marielle, I think everybody can relate to that. The confidence, absolutely, Olivier, the confidence suddenly comes from nowhere, or maybe it's the fact that we don't care anymore. So we lose that embarrassment, we lose that sort of shame and care, and yes. But one thing we can do right from the beginning to help learners as well, not only coaching around the triggers, but Feriel, you were the guinea pig for that research. I can understand. One thing we can do is to really simplify the process for the learner. If you've got a learner that has never ever learned a language before, you might want to simplify terminology. Somebody actually asked me yesterday, what if I have a learner that's never learned a foreign language before? How can I help them? How can I help them even to relate? And I would actually say, talk to them about their native language first. And I was years ago with an English lady who wanted to learn Spanish. She hadn't got a clue about grammar because, in England, they don't teach us grammar. That's why many English people, we just don't have a clue from school about all the grammar terminology or how it comes together. We just speak it. And most British people, by the way, I think we've learned it by teaching it. That's how we've learned our own language. And I was with this lady years ago who wanted to learn Spanish. So first I was sitting and going through the English present tenses with her and getting her to notice, okay, well, how do we use the present tense in English? And getting her to distinguish, okay, well, yeah, we can say, I am eating, I eat. Oh, wow. We do have two ways of saying it in English. Okay, and in Spanish, too, you have two ways of saying it. So simplify the process with a beginner, help them to feel calm, no stress with terminology. If they get confused with adjective, adverb, how shall we call them then? I had an Italian who called them the doings and the beings. Fine. If that helps you to learn, fine. And all the way through the process, these constant check-ins. How are you feeling? How is this for you? How can I help you feel safer? What can I do to help at this point? And you're going to bring in that psychological safety. And the one thing we need as well is the certainty. Certainty will bring the psychological safety too. Certainty means you need to have a roadmap. You need to have a structure. Even in a coaching process, I'm not saying you need to follow a book. I'm saying you need to create a personalized structure from each learner. That is key. And that's going to bring certainty as well. And by the way, it brings certainty for us because we know what we're doing in every single session. Now let's move into how the brain likes to learn. And somebody said it earlier in the chat box, scaffolding. Scaffold, scaffold, scaffold. Al-Shaima. I think I'm pronouncing her name right, I think, hopefully. You know, the first thing we should be asking a beginner is, have you ever learned a language? And what are the languages that you know? We should never, ever, ever presume that a beginner in a language is a complete beginner in language learning. Now, if I know that my beginner knows other languages, I'm not going to treat them like a beginner at all. I'm going to treat them like a pro because they've learned other languages. So we need to be very careful. I sometimes get people when they come into that learning process, when I'm learning a new language, and they're kind of treating me like a beginner, and I'm saying, no, let me see if I can springboard from other languages. Because that's what you want them to do. If they have a repertoire of other languages, you can understand how to get them to springboard into the new one. Essential information. What languages do you already know? Plus native. And, you know, many, many times I have, over these last 10 years, you know, it's 10 years that we are rolling with our certification, our course. And in those first years, there were quite a few criticisms when I was talking about connecting native and target language. And I know that a lot of teacher training programs do say no native language in the learning process. Now, I'm not saying that we should be constantly speaking native language. What I'm saying is we should be provoking connections with the native language, and it's different. When I look back at my language learning process, and believe me, it was an innocent learning process. I never ever had the goal in my life to be a polyglot, never. It happened. But when I look back, it happened a lot because I was scaffolding from one language to the next. Firstly, at school, I did Greek and Latin, ancient Greek and Latin, plus French. The French and the Latin helped me to teach myself Spanish at the age of 15. Remember, I was there with the books every day, and I was connecting in with my ancient Latin, my French, and my newly found Spanish. That first love letter was a mix of all three languages, by the way, ancient Latin, French, and Spanish, and he understood. Bingo. So after that, living in Spain, I springboarded the French, the Latin, the Spanish into Catalan. After that, living in Italy, working in Italy. By the way, I never had lessons in these languages. I never had a lesson in Italian in my life, but going to Italy, working in Italy, springboarding from Latin, French, Catalan, Spanish into Italian. And I remember in I think it was about 2006, I was commuting Italy and Germany. So I was living partly in Germany, partly in Italy. And in Germany, I was thinking, what is the reason I can't learn German? What's wrong with me? And then I realized it was because I was only scaffolding from Latin, French, Spanish, Catalan, Italian, Latin languages. And when I opened the door to the Germanic side of English, that's when German started flooding in. And that's when I started making connections. And that's when German really started to roll for me. Now, in other languages, I'm trying to scaffold to go faster. And it's really interesting. You know, you open the doors to curiosity. Now, when you're sitting with learners, remember I said that I had a German and a Turkish client wanting to learn Spanish from English. Actually, it was beautiful because from English, there's so much correlation with Spanish. And we were springboarding and get them into the cognates first. My beginner Spanish Turkish client, in the first session, we were doing word formation and we were connecting all the cognates in English and Spanish. All the words that end in tion, sion, all the adjectives like if, al, ik. He started creating the most amazing sentences like education is fantastic. And honestly, he got so excited. He left that session thinking, yes, this is easy. This is going to be really easy. He went home, he created 50 sentences by himself. And he came running back into the next session saying, Rachel, look at all these sentences I've created. That's what you want. An excited beginner. And by the way, there we have it. He was motivated enough to go home and do it by himself. Commitment. So scaffolding is key. You know, in 2016, we have the research demonstrating that when we learn a new language, our brain is actually going to the mother tongue areas first. It's trying to connect in, it's trying to springboard. This is how we learn a language, by patterning, connecting, associating. Now, the one thing I would say, and I would actually, I'm just opening up to see if I can see more cameras there. How many of you would agree that mistakes are mostly native interference? So what we need to do is get curious about mistakes and say to the learner, where is that mistake coming from? Even if you know it, don't tell them, get them to work it out. Well, because in my native language, we say this and this and this. Okay, great, but in English, that doesn't work. May I share with you how it is in English? So you get them to become aware. You bring them the mirror of, this is how it is in English. Timea, I didn't know you were in there somewhere. I can see you now. Good to see you, Timea. Mistakes are geographic. Yes. Wow. Did you know the French word compétir exists in Africa? Wow. Well, with the same meaning, Olivier? Yes, same meaning. Wow. Goodness. And I'm curious if that came in through Afrikaans, through the Dutch, maybe the Dutch-French connection. I have no idea. Who knows? By the way, the other day I was looking at one of my favorite words when I do my course is eek. to eke something out. And apparently it's Norse. It comes from Norse language. So sometimes even getting your learner to become curious, where does that come from? And yesterday I was asking my group if they know how to say my friend in Greek. Do any of you know how to say my friend in Greek? I'm not asking the Greek people, by the way. No? Do any of you know how to say friends of wisdom? And it's a word that you use all the time, everybody. Here it is. And you're never going to forget this ever in your life. Philosophia. Philo is friend. Sophia is wisdom. You can now say my friend in Greek, which is philos more, for male, by the way. Now, believe me, I just learned that on the hoof, and it's stuck with me forever. And I'm convinced it's going to stick with you forever now. And that's what you want with your beginners. That's what you want. And if you can get them into these quick wins and they get the success, they're going to want more. This is the hunger to learn. So scaffolding is key. It really is. And the other thing I would say with beginners, how can we help them to relate to the language? And again, oh, Nia, you're saying your professor used to investigate children's mistakes made in their mother tongue for linguistic purposes. Yes, Nia, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, one of my favorite mistakes as a kiddie, and I think some of the English will relate to this with me, and some English kids, you will hear this, is the bring, brang, brung. And my mother was forever saying, no, it's not brang, it's brought. Why? Why? If it's ring, rang, rung, why isn't it bring, brang, brung? You know, that this is how we function, and you'll probably have learners doing that as well. So there again, it's about highlighting the mistakes, saying, well done, because I'm hearing your patterning, but in this case, it just doesn't work. In this case, it's different. May I share with you this difference? Woordenschat in Dutch, the treasure of words. Love it, Olivia. Now let's go back to relatedness. You know, again, if I can just highlight this with my experience. As a kiddie, when I was at school, I started learning French at the age of, I think it was 8. I can still remember that picture of the farmyard with all the animals on it in French, the mouton especially. And, you know, for years and years, I used to think, I love French, but I'm no good at this. It felt like French was far away from me. It felt like it was something that I just couldn't connect in with. At the age of 15, I met a French lady who was 21. We got on like a house on fire. And we really were having lots and lots and lots of conversations in French because she couldn't speak English. But we had such a good rapport. And I was just flowing in French with her. And I remember to this day, I remember the thought, wow, I'm having girly conversations with her in French. We're talking about fashion, about discos, about men, boys, everything, makeup. And honestly, I think that was when I connected in with the language. For the first time in my life, I felt, wow, I can speak French. Now, the interesting thing is that a lot of our beginners come into a language learning process thinking that it's out there and thinking that it's something totally, totally separate from them. But every single thing that we do, all of us in our different countries, when we go into the real and personal lives that we all have, we're all having very similar conversations. We all go to buy food. We all go to get water. We might go out shopping. We may go to a restaurant. We go in and put petrol in the car. So, you know, the more that we can get them to connect with the language, to relate to it, the more they are going to get it. And this is where I say that we need to move away from the books. The books are about Jack and Jill. We need to make it real. We need to make it personal for them. And they need to contextualize the language as soon as possible. Even a beginner, they need to be making it real, personal, contextualized. And again, we have to coach them around those negative beliefs. I'm never going to do this. I can't do this. Language learning is so hard. Actually, I would like to think that, you know, it's all about the coach, the teacher, the educator. It's not about the topic. How many of us can remember topics at school where it was the teacher that got us through? So relating is very important, and talking to them about the learning plateau. Now, language learning. Actually, when we learn a language, our brain is chunking it in. Our brain is chunking in phonemes, syllables, words, sentences, phrases, and we're doing it in levels. Sort of, we're doing it like in the A1 level, then the A2 level. And our subconscious brain is trying to piece it together. Now, when we are almost like with jigsaw puzzles in the air, and the brain is trying to put them together, that's when we go on this learning plateau. And it feels like we're not getting anywhere, but actually our subconscious brain is working very hard in the background. And then suddenly, oh, I'm hearing new words. I'm hearing the words. I'm understanding more. And then we go for the next A2, B1. And all of those chunks, there's a period of time when our subconscious brain is trying to piece it together. And we are thinking, I'm not learning. I'm not making progress. So talk to the learner about the learning plateau as well, especially beginners, how this process will be and how it is for all of us. And again, relating them to the process is going to help them to understand that they're not unique, they're not different. It's not that they can't learn, they can. And the importance of conscious and subconscious learning. You know, as kiddies, we learn a language through the subconscious. Our native language or any other language under the age of 7, we are learning it through implicit learning, subconscious input. After the age of 7 or 8, we are then able to learn with explicit. But the thing that we all forget is, as adults, we can learn both ways, explicit and implicit. If you have ever gone to a country and learned a language, you have learned implicitly. If you, on top of that, had lessons and did some conscious, explicit learning, you've learned both ways. Now, when I look back, and I keep going back to Spanish that I learned when I was 15, I was actually learning through explicit learning for 2 years, because I was writing letters for 2 years. And I was studying the grammar, the structure, everything, writing. I could write to a C1 letter, to a C1 level, but I couldn't speak it. When I went to live in Spain at the age of 17, I then started to marry my written explicit learning into the implicit input of immersion. It took me 6 months. May I say that Spanish is my strongest language, and I really believe it's because I had both explicit and implicit. I had both. Now, many of our learners come to us and they think that language learning is explicit, battling, studying, going away and doing 1 hour's homework. Actually, no. That's part of the process, but implicit learning is key, absolutely key. Did you say your name is Shika? Al-Shamma? I think you gave me the simplified form of your name there. Yes, absolutely. What I'm saying is, let's take it a different direction here. If you've only got implicit, it takes years. If you think of children, all of us, it took us about 5 or 6 years to learn our native language well. That's a long time. And if you go to live in a country and it's only implicit learning, it takes some years. If you've got only explicit learning, if you've only got learners coming to do 1 hour a week, battling with the prefrontal cortex, going into the theory and the grammar, it's going to take them years. If you've got both, it's going to take less. The fastest way to learning is with explicit and implicit input. If you've got somebody who goes to live in the country, and on top of that, they are doing explicit grammar rules, studying, analyzing, rationalizing, they could be learning a language in 1 year. But the problem is that we have a problem to understand the implicit learning. So let me just go back here. You know, this research from 2006 and 2003 says that the vast majority of learning actually takes place at the subconscious level. What does it mean, subconscious input? It really means that you don't have to be paying attention, but your subconscious brain is picking it up. Now, that means having the radio on in the background while you're cooking, or even while you're working in the different language that you're learning. Radio, podcasts, just rolling in the back, music in the background. Having sticky notes all over the place. You don't have to be consciously looking at them, but they're around. And your subconscious brain will pay attention to them. Maybe change the phone into the target language. Maybe just get your computer into the target language. Living in Germany, I used to have all my computers were in German. I had no choice. So all the instructions were in German. So things like that, your brain just starts to absorb. And that's what you want. You want subconscious input. I had clients who were reading in English, and their passive vocabulary was phenomenal. I had one gentleman called Thomas, and now and again he used to come out with words, and I would say, Thomas, I didn't teach you that word. You didn't get that from me. Where did you get that from? Oh, I must have got it from this book. And he could even remember which book he got it from. It's like, wow. Never, 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 never should we underestimate the power of the subconscious brain. And the more we can expose the brain to the language, the more the brain is going to absorb it. So marrying explicit and implicit, and asking your learners, how could you replicate immersion setting from your home? Because nowadays you can. Nowadays, you can put TV into the languages, you can put any device into the language, you could play video games in the language, you could do anything in the target language. And it's not that you're studying the target language, but it's there. And it's a constant for the brain in the background. Now, finally, with our beginners, and by the way, even with any learner, even with ourselves, how can we trick the brain into learning? And here it's quite interesting. You know, firstly, we have to understand, or our brain has to understand, the importance of learning this language. You know, when you go into an emergent setting, you go into survival mode sometimes, and you will learn because you have to eat, you have to buy something, you have to be able to survive. So how could we, in that in that target language, sort of get the brain to think, okay, I need these expressions to survive? Or how could I say to my brain, this is going to be useful, I'm going to need this? And there you can get learners into the verbs that they're going to mostly use. If you think about it, in all the languages, you've got verbs that we always use. I want, I like, I need, I must, I can. By the way, do any of you remember, or have any of you ever seen any of the Michelle Thomas courses? Ever heard of Michelle Thomas? Nobody? Goodness. Michelle Thomas was quite famous, I think, in the early 2000s, the 1990s, 2000. If you have a look, Michelle Thomas method of language learning. And he very much goes into the patterns of, he gets you talking a language. And honestly, if you listen to some of his courses, after 1, 2, 3, 4 sessions, you're saying sentences and words and really rolling into conversations. But what he does, he focuses on repetitive language. Language is repetitive. So help your learners to identify the repetitive expressions, the repetitive verbs, and get them into it. And Nia, no, it's much more that sort of coming into the cognates, coming into the repetitive, and then creating the sentences, springboarding, scaffolding from native also to target. Very interesting. Now, the problem that I have with the Michelle Thomas courses is that the trainers are very directive. And after about 20 minutes of listening to them, I have to turn them off. Because as a coach, I can't deal with directives anymore. It's quite grating for the brain. Now, what is the emotional impact for the learning? If there is positive emotional impact, then you're going to be learning faster. So get your learners into that survival, useful, emotional impact, or curiosity. Arouse that curiosity. Where does this come from? Anna, thank you for that link there. Thank you for that. And also get them to repeat, recall. That sort of frequency of consistency is going to help as well. And these are a little bit the hacks for the brain. Other tips and tricks, well, as we said before, quick wins. With beginners, if you can get them into quick wins, absolutely. And celebrate the small successes. Well done, fantastic. Wow, as a beginner, you've got it. Yes, let's move on. Also, learning sounds before words can also help. Get them to play with the sounds. Have any of you seen on YouTube that amazing, funny comedy video where this lady is an interpreter? And she sits at the table and she goes into all the different languages, but all she does is the sounds of each language. It's hilarious. Do have a look for that. And, you know, you can have fun with that. You can really have fun with that. Sometimes as well, the sounds are pretty difficult. For Spanish, Timea, yes. Yesterday we were with our isiZulu Neurolanguage coach. And believe me, in isiZulu, there are clicks and things that you can never even imagine doing with your mouth. So yes, unbelievable. Some languages you do need to play with those sounds and have fun with them. You know, it is about making it fun. And above all, tricking the brain that actually we're not studying. It's not about studying. It's not about hard work. And as teachers, we have to stop making learners feel guilty. Oh, you didn't do your homework. We have to move away from that. We have to understand that we live in a busy world, busy people, busy brains. I'm also guilty of not doing work at home when I should do. But the last thing I need is somebody saying, oh, you didn't do it. Why? No. What we have to do is acknowledge, I'm really sensing that you've had a busy week. And firstly, I want to say thank you for being here, that you've made time to be here. Now, what could you do to incorporate actually language contact without having to sit down and do something for a long time? Maybe even 5 minutes a day is enough. 10 minutes a day. You know, at the moment, I am at night before I go to bed. And by the way, that's the best time for learning, because then when you sleep, your brain is kind of getting it in place. I'm sitting doing some language practice. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's a little bit longer, but I'm doing it. And it's just 5-10 minutes a night. What can your learners do? When could they do that? Could they do it 5 minutes at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner? Maybe they could do 5, 5, and 5. That's 15 minutes. And when you add it up every day, it's summing up to the 1 hour sitting there doing work. And it's better for the brain. It's better for the spacing. So help your learners to understand that this isn't about sitting studying. This isn't about battling with the brain. That's not language learning. And that we appreciate how busy they are. Another thing to talk about with learners is actually, they've done some new studies about exercising and learning at the same time. Now, I know that sometimes when I was up and running with my leg, I would often have listening to the languages, maybe podcasts, maybe music even in that language. And it seems to have a beneficial effect. It seems to be that when we get the motor cortex going, the motor machinery of the body, the exercise actually stimulates learning. So if you've got kiddies, if you've got classes of kidding, get them moving and talking and learning in the language. Could help them to connect and imprint. And the research, I think there's going to be a lot more research on this from the neuroscientists as well. And little tips and tricks, thinking in the foreign language, having fun in the target language. Maybe they can do some hobbies in the target language. We've got some learners doing their yoga in that different language. Why not? And trying to think in it. You know, every time you have those monkey thoughts, put it in the other language that you're learning. Or any other language that you know. Apparently as well, chanting and drumming when you learn also engages the motor processes and helps the learning. How many of us learned nursery rhymes when we were little girls or boys? You know, and how many of us went into Latin? Amo, amas, amat, amamo. I can't remember anymore. And even when I was doing Spanish, you know, that sort of como, comes, come, comemos, coméis, comen. And there is actually, I think there's one gentleman who does rapping for language learning. He gets kids in schools doing raps. Fantastic, brilliant. anything that's going to make it stick. And apparently talking to ourselves, it actually is mimicking our internal dialogue. So talk to yourself in the foreign language. And apparently we do pay attention to ourselves. We might not pay attention to anybody else, but when you talk to yourself, it seems that we do pay attention to ourselves. That's curious, isn't it? I'm going to have to try it more often. Rachel, you should do this. And music demonstrates that, you know, multiple areas of the brain are lighting up. Music is a multiple area of the brain phenomena. And definitely can help impact the learning. So these are tricks and tips for not only beginners, but for anybody. But for your beginners, get them to turbo with these tips. And Anna Paula, yes, when you're dreaming in the foreign language, absolutely. And, you know, sometimes when you have multiple foreign languages and then you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, I was dreaming Italian last night. Oh, that's curious. Why was I dreaming Italian last night? You know, and then another night you might be dreaming in French and you go, what? It's quite interesting how the brain functions. It really is the mystery of life. So, turbocharging beginners, we have touched upon a lot of things, you know, a lot of things that we do in Neurolanguage Coaching. Yes, Jason Levine, thank you. He's the rapper. He is, I think he's in France, isn't he, Margarita? I recognize that he's from over there. Paris, yeah. By the way, I will be in Tissot, Paris, everybody. So if anybody's going to be there in November, in a couple of weeks' time, looking forward to seeing you in Paris. Neurolanguage coaching. Definitely we can do this with beginners. We're constantly communicating through coaching conversations, using the coaching competences, using the structure, understanding how the brain works, sharing that with learners, implementing the neuroscience, developing their metacognition, and we have unique ways of doing it. Unique to us, we go into motivation, mechanical mastery, we go into the 5 C's structure of the process, you have the progress learning, and PACT PQC, where we're breaking it down and building it up through coaching conversations, whether it's grammar or non-grammar. And very proud to say that we've been 10 years with our accredited program. I think now it seems that coaching is becoming trendy out there. But we, I think, are still the only ones worldwide to carry accreditation for language learning process. So I'm very grateful to all the neurolanguage coaches who are out there. There are now, actually, we're nearly coming up to 1,300. And some of you are here tonight. So thank you for being here. And honestly, a community of like-minded, phenomenal language educators, really. All of you I know, and even those who are with us at the webinar, I'm pretty sure that you're already coming into coaching processes intuitively. Most people, when they come to my course, you're already doing this and you're already opening up that sort of intuition of doing it differently. And personally, I think it's because the learners of today have totally changed. And intuitively, we know that we have to morph with the learners. Professional network, we do have free webinars, as you can see, we do have free workshops. We have exclusive workshops for the coaches. We're going to be doing a marketing workshop actually soon, Neurolanguage coaches, I'll let you know about that soon. In December, we will do a brain boot camp, a brain grammar friendly boot camp, where we're going to go into grammar troubleshooting. And that will be in December. And there we will actually, I will actually be asking all of you on that webinar, and it's going to be for coaches and non-coaches. I will be asking all of you what you want to troubleshoot with grammar. If there's anything you want to unravel, discuss, talk about, and how we can get it to the learner in more simplified, bite-sized, chunk-sized bits, then definitely join us for that one. We will have a neurolanguage coach touch base before Christmas. We'll have a Christmas party behind the scenes, and next year we will have 2 conferences, everybody. We will have the Neurolanguage Coach conference, which will only be for the coaches, in March. That will be in Sitges, Spain, 30th and 31st of March. And I'm just preparing the agenda in these days. I'll get that up and running soon. And then in June, July, we will have the Neuro Heart Education Conference for the world online. And that will be more I'm going to say a generic education, where we're coming into that space of neuro heart education. We are going to be getting the foundation up and running. I will be calling out to all the coaches soon for some volunteers. If any of you want to start with me, I want to, in 2023, get that off the ground and into, let's say, being, functioning, etc. across the world.